Hi, and welcome to the Corporate Jet Investor podcast. This week, we're absolutely delighted to be joined by David Dixon, President of Jetcraft Asia. David, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Despite the late hour, it's possible.
You're used to that, aren't you? Yeah. So you're coming to Hong Kong. When did you first move to Hong Kong?
I was living and working in Africa, and an opportunity came up in late 1980 to go to Korea on a specific project. I made my way to Seoul, came back through Hong Kong to return to Kenya or Nairobi, and I kind of thought I liked this, and I was then asked to go to Bangkok, and so after that, 6 months later, I'm living in Hong Kong. So let me say the rest is history. In fact, they said, how quickly can you move? And I said, well, 1 week. I was that keen to move, but I mean, it just took time to get things sorted out.
And so that's 45 years in Hong Kong. You've been selling aircraft since 1972, at which point you also received an MBE from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II for your contribution to British exports. In all the different periods you've had, when were you having the most fun at work?
I'm still having fun every day, even this morning. I don't think it's changed. I wouldn't be doing it for 50-something. You've just done the sums there. It's 50-something years. I think if he's doing one essential job, which is I sell aircraft, I've been doing it because I enjoy it. The challenge has always been there. Of course, there are down days or dead days or what other days they are, but I find it challenging since the day I started.
There's no one period when you're in Africa selling to airlines, or when you moved to Asia, it was a virgin business jet market.
Well, I wasn't in the business jet. I was in the airliner side at that time. Business aircraft wasn't even on the horizon at that point. And China was on everybody's lips. It was just opening up. Deng Xiaoping was sort of making sweeping changes, and everyone wanted a China policy. And I sort of stuck my hand up and said, I'm your man, not knowing really where the hell I was going. I mean, my knowledge of China was very much from school and the newspapers.
How well do you understand it now?
I don't think you can ever understand it. I think as a foreigner, one is always learning. I just know more than others who think they know it after 5 minutes. I just don't believe you can ever get inside quite the system. I mean, bearing in mind that the political system is really quite different. But I find it fascinating. I wouldn't be here. But let's say places like Japan and Korea, they're completely different from a European perspective as well. I wouldn't want this to just be a China discussion. I think all of the countries represent their own different challenge. And to your very opening line, do I enjoy it? The absolute yes.
Okay, let's go back to the start of your career. You've just finished school, and you're a keen reader of Flight International. You can already fly. Tell everyone how you started.
My mistake. I wanted to fly professionally. That was the dream. I had aspirations of being BOAC. That gives you an idea of age and timing. And I was accepted by the flying school. But it was the first Arab oil embargo of the West, and the school got shut down. And with it went my position in the course. And I was stuck. I was working in a travel agents. I then got working for an air charter company out in Gatwick. And I saw this advert in Flight, and it said, are you a young man who can sell airplanes? And had flying experience. So the only thing I had on the sort of list of wants, as it were, or requirements was previous flying experience. Oh yeah, another one was second language. I still don't have a second language. So I just boldly stuck something in the post, obviously. I wrote a letter and 3 months later, I'm sitting at the desk on my first day.
And they never checked your second language?
No. Well, they did. I admitted I didn't have it. At school, I was told by my French teacher, you're going to fail the exam, don't bother. Concentrate on maths, physics, and geography, which were the A levels I did. So I did, and I got this. But they said, don't worry about French. You're definitely not going to pass. So there you are. Not even schoolboy French.
And describe Britten-Norman aircraft to people who don't know them.
Well, it's a bush aeroplane. It's a small 10-seat piston engine, fixed gear, no nonsense aeroplane designed to go where a lot of airplanes can't even think of going. I mean, that was one of the nice parts about it. You could land on a beach. It still does, or did until recently, up in Scotland, between Westray and Papa Westray. But in my case, in Africa, it was going around game parks. Flying Doctor used it, the locust control, desert locust control, which is still going today, although a lot of that is now drones. Flying doctors still use airplanes. It was going to take supplies, people, equipment to remote part of the country. So one of the more interesting locations was Lesotho, which a certain person in Pennsylvania Avenue can't remember where that is, but there are airfields at 10,000 feet, and if you only know anything about an islander, it's quite exciting at 10,000 feet to be flying a piston engine aircraft off a gravel runway.
And your job there wasn't like selling aircraft now in Africa. You didn't have a mobile phone. You weren't in contact with Home Office as much.
All true, and I think that was a benefit because it made you think. You actually had to write a letter, make it a proposal, had to think it through, and I believe that was invaluable. Today, the tendency is to pick up the phone, ring the boss, or go to a database and find the answer. This stops working in my mind. Or understanding what that information is. The information is basically the same, but maybe not so much of it back then. But how to use it, how would you want it presented? I often would say, and one of the first things I did at Britten-Norman was thrown back into this magnificent report, at least I thought it was. It was about 40 pages. Desmond Norman put it back on my desk. He says, I want one page. Drill down. So I think the value in that was huge, and I use it today. I write letters and sort of think, what does that person want to read? What do they want to hear, rather than what we think they want to hear, or what is as with an OEM, what the OEM thought they wanted to do. Try and put yourself on the other side of the table and create the message that's got the best chance of success.
Was it less competitive then? Now, if someone's buying an aircraft, a new aircraft, it's very easy to get all three manufacturers down to visit you. You can have, in your days, were you knocking on doors for airlines who didn't know they wanted a new aircraft?
Well, you had a good idea. I mean, you knew what they had. There was always a fleet list somewhere. You could work out what they're flying, where they're going, age of the airplanes, growth environments, things like that. Then, so there were indications out there. It wasn't completely barren of you weren't knocking on every door, although that did happen. But there were competitors. De Havilland was still there today. The Twin Otter is still there. I beat the Twin Otter in my very first deal. And it's still going 50 years later. So is the Islander, albeit slightly lesser form than it was then. And Cessna were there. But they didn't have the Caravan that we know today. That came along after I stopped that business. But there were still competitors. It wasn't in that segment. Corporate jets, there were Learjets at that time in the very early stages of the citation program. But I wasn't in that field. But there was always a competitor knocking on your door. And it was never an open and shut case that you had to make the case for your product. And that's the same today.
And when you're selling to an airline, is it a completely different experience to selling to someone buying a corporate jet for their business or for their own use?
Well, again, to what I was saying about finding out what the hot buttons are, what an airline is looking at is economics largely. Um, and does it do what they want to do? So yes, it's a different focus. Understanding the aircraft, understanding its application, not trying to put a square peg in a round hole, things like that. So those sort of basic elements survive today, but your client is today with a business aircraft is one or two people, perhaps Mr. and Mrs. Chairman or Vice Chairman or CEO. Whereas back then, I'd have to get it through a board of directors. So you were challenged in that sense differently. But that's one of the reasons I like the transition to when I moved from airlines into corporate aircraft, just mean expanding that experience base.
And so take us through your transition you went from Bristol Norman to Shorts. And well, and then Shorts was acquired by Bombardier.
Correct.
And then how long were you at Bombardier for?
33 years, 11 months, and 19 days.
And
how do I know that? My pension, just so I'm not a smart ass, my pension statement comes in every month. And at the bottom, it says years of service. So I'm reminded every month, 33 years, 11 months, and 19 days. That does actually include the Shorts time because Shorts were taken over and I stayed in the same program. But that just a minor little humorous fact, but it lingers there in my mind every month. But the transition was because I moved from Bombardier. When I moved into Bombardier, they owned Canadair. It was a separate entity, Canadair de Havilland, and the Dash 8 series at that point, and the movement into the CRJ. And I was working in that area because that's predominantly where Shorts were. I'd done CAAC in China. I had been with Philippine Airlines, with Thai Airways, and various other operators in Asia and Australia. So naturally, I gravitated towards the Dash 8 series, and then the birth of the CRJ, which then led to all sorts of other programs.
So when you joined Bombardier, we're talking about these other programs. What was the defining program for Bombardier?
I think any new program, and I remember the chairman, Laurent Bergouin at the time, making the point, you bet the company on some of these programs. And there's no doubt they bet Bombardier on that airplane. If it had failed, it could have severely impaired the whole future of the company. They inherited the de Havilland series, so that wasn't quite the risk. But the Global was really their first launch into an entirely new program. And I remember the time he went to the board with something less than 50 LOIs to say, let's go and do this. And look, I don't know how many years later, we're close to 20 years later, there's 1,000 of them floating around. Now, at the time, you couldn't even get 100 on the map. At the time, and wandering around with it, because Gulfstream were out there making points. They felt that they were the only game in town. So it was a tough time to get up and go and fight the cause with that background, but it worked. And I'm pleased to say I was part of it at the very beginning. And as I say, you bet the company. I don't know that Boeing and Airbus bet the company, but they certainly can impale themselves seriously if one of the airplanes goes wrong, if you get it wrong.
Can you remember exactly how many Globals Bombardier thought the market was?
400. And that was to be of ultra long range airplanes. And that was to be shared between Gulfstream and Bombardier. So if you took an optimistic view of 50-50 or a fair view 50-50, it's still only 200 airplanes. So you're going to write off a programmer less than that. That's back in 1996, 5, 6, somewhere on that.
And then, do you think, since then we've seen OEMs really, or we've seen Gulfstream and Bombardier and now Dassault really focusing on that top market. And it's not unusual to hear someone say, are there enough buyers out there? Are they right? Do you think that it's just impossible to forecast the top end?
Yes. To a certain degree, so long as the economy generally moves forward, the market is going to expand and grow. The magic part is to try and work out how much. And you might find there's too many airplanes in one sector or segment, challenging for too few clients. And you see that in the production numbers. But I think it's fair to say that the market is growing as the economy grows. And I've often mentioned, I think we're a good barometer as an industry, business aviation. If the CEO, president, whatever, of a certain company is feeling good, their own businesses are going well, if there's a degree of optimism, and that can get reflected in our business. And if we're doing well, that's a reflection that they're doing well. If we're not selling, then probably there's a economic pressure at some point somewhere coming around the horizon. I think we're the last to go to the top, and we're the first to go to the bottom as an industry.
Okay, so fast forwarding to August 2025. Yeah, you work for Jetcraft, one of the largest, if not the largest, seller of pre-owned large jets in the world. But you're also based in Asia, which is a very different market to North America. How are you feeling?
Optimistic. I think this year's been a bit confusing, or tail end of last. Obviously, one word that's been on a lot of people's minds is tariffs. In North America, perhaps another one was depreciation. And I think there's a bit of greater clarity on both points now. After COVID, if I can sort of backtrack a little bit, the world sort of went from standing still to being astronomical in our business. We went from sort of zero to hero in the space of 12 months or something. It's back to, sort of 24 was back to more rational market. Then, of course, what's happened in the first 6 months of this year, the 100% depreciation or the restoration of that is going to help hugely in our business. And there's signs of that in North America, very definitely. So that's going to be a big boost. I think the tail end of this year will be exceptional. Doesn't have a big impact over here, other than if we're selling airplanes back to the States. If someone's from here, the market in the States is such that we've probably got a willing buyer for it. Tariffs is a little bit more difficult. I just don't know enough about the subject. Every day you pick up a different story, line, pressure point, who's in love with who's fallen out. Hard one to call. Aircraft seem to slip under the radar when the final deals are struck. I believe under the EU agreement that aircraft are exempt. Under UK's agreement, I believe is exempt. Canada's obviously having its own particular issues. So I think I can't predict that. I've got my views. I'm not going to express them here, sorry, but it's a complicated subject where that's going to go. But generally speaking, the market out here, and with the exception of China, which is still a negative market overall in numbers, the rest of the region is doing very well, including India.
Okay, we'll come back to China and India. On the tariff side, at the moment, the big winner actually seems to be Switzerland, which doesn't have a trade deal. Everyone else seems okay. But I think if you're a Pilatus sales guy in the States, it's a hard market. Can you look? I think there's a mistake, isn't there, where companies in Europe or America, the boss will say, "What's our China strategy? What's our Asia strategy?" And no one ever goes, "What's your French strategy? What's your European strategy?" We tend to, but there's still perceptions about the Asian business jet market that buyers in Asia tend to take slightly longer to decide than, say, an American. Is that fair?
That's very fair. It hasn't changed ever since the day I set off the plane in 1981. It's the same. It takes time.
And what about aircraft? There were lots of perceptions about Asian aircraft suffering more from corrosion. Is that fair?
I think it is a more environmentally hostile environment. And everyone knows there's less hangar space here and things like that. So aircraft are outside more. You just have to be looking, and you know where to look in the right places. There are always horror stories. I know horror stories coming from other parts of the world, so it's not unique to Asia.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think Europe, you can find horror stories about landing gear very easily.
You find very often that a certain component or part of an aeroplane is more susceptible than another, and you know where to go and where to look.
And I guess the other thing that used to scare American buyers is paperwork. You used to hear stories about people buying an aircraft and the maintenance records being in a different language. You don't really see that now, do you?
I don't know. I think that was a bit overplayed. There would have been possibly one or two examples, but not now. I think that's a thing of some distant past now. Having said that, I just got an aeroplane that I'm working on at the moment, which is out of North America, and there's a records problem with that one. It's a 2006 aeroplane. It's nearly 20 years old. And guess what? The second owner didn't keep the records quite up to date. And, we're now on to record owner number 4 or 5 or something. And so, but it happens anywhere. Occasionally the ball gets dropped. Over here, no. Language at the beginning, I think, yes, there were some learning curves. But those have gone away. I haven't heard of that problem.
10 years ago, if you had an American buying a Global and they had an option of a brand new or very, very well looked after Asian aircraft that had been with a top operator looked after, or you had one that had been kept shoddily on the beach in Miami, they would have gone for the Miami one. Do you think that perception's gone? Do you think COVID, when we had the shortage of aircraft, that people were happy to look around the world? Do you think now, okay, it's less hassle, it's easier to go and visit the one in Miami, but actually you'd be crazy not to look at the one in Asia?
Absolutely. I think that sort of perception has largely been overcome. Certainly, if it's in your backyard or down the road and two hours away rather than 15 hours away or 18 hours away, that's easier. Logistics, all those things, that makes sense. That has a cost. There's no question. But as you say, if it's exceptionally low hours, and out here, COVID hit us harder than almost anywhere else. I mean, Asia, North Asia especially, much harder. And there's some very low time airplanes as a result of that. Low time is a wish on a wish list very often. Oh, this one's got low time. Well, part of it is due to COVID. So out of that horrible period that we went through, there's a little bit of a silver lining.
Jetcraft inventories a lot of aircraft. You buy aircraft and resell them, and you own them for a period. Asia is and China has been a great picking ground, hasn't it, for inventory in the last since COVID?
Yes, I mean it's been a good market for sure, but the whole world has been in that sense. But what we are able to do, perhaps more than some others, is with the credit lines that we have, we're able to make a deal happen that wouldn't otherwise have happened. Someone wants to buy this, but they've got to sell that. We'll buy that, so they'll go and buy this. So there's ways that we can work the market perhaps a little bit more than others, because we consider that we will take a risk, even if there isn't a home for the traded aeroplane straight away. With the network we have around the world, I might know of a requirement in South Africa, let's say, or a requirement in South America, which someone else may not know about. So I can make that deal happen. And that's the benefit of having, I forget the numbers now, it's a sort of something like 100 people around the world specifically aimed at the process of buying and selling airplanes.
You mentioned China and India. Let's start with China. In the past, I guess in 2012, when the Chinese market really started taking off for aircraft, and we saw Minsheng ordering large orders, we saw OEMs getting very excited. I think lots of people just saw Asia as China. That's changed now, hasn't it?
Oh, yes. I mean, yeah, absolutely. COVID accelerated that. I think maybe it's over exuberance, if I can use that expression. People foresaw greater opportunities there than there were there. But it's still, at the end of the day, there's a limit of the number of airports and therefore the number of runways. So there's only, and the airlines, for all the growth that's going on in the air, they dominate the skies in China. And we're very much, way down the pecking order as an industry compared to the airlines. Even if China says it's going to build 20, 30 brand new airports every year for the next 10 years or something, that's still a long way down from the numbers of airports in the States or in the Europe. So where we can fly, opportunities for landing slots, all those things, are still very limited. So there's a constraint by the system, the infrastructure. India's got a similar set of problems. It doesn't have the political overlay element that China has. But India has got the same sort of general infrastructure constraints. Australia, Indonesia, they don't have that. Indonesia is 13,000 islands, I think, something like that. So potentially every one of those is an aircraft carrier in my mind. And the distances, we are a long way from anywhere. People forget Indonesia, one end to the other, is New York, LA. So there's lots of potential for the smaller airplanes there, going between those 13,000 lines, same in the Philippines. And the distances, you need something that goes to your mine site or your resource factory or whatever installation somewhere in more remote parts of the country, because resources tend to be in obscure parts of the country. And then you need to go down to Sydney. Well, Sydney's 6 to 8 hours away, depending which bit of Indonesia you're in. So we find the larger aircraft. I'm seeing now more activity in the bottom end of the market, a greater acceptance and understanding of the smaller airplanes. I even sold a couple of airplanes with propellers the other day, which I haven't done for a very long time. But I quite enjoyed it. Well, I did enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Back to roots, as they might say.
I remember sitting in 2012 being told that by 2025, China would be a bigger business jet market than the US. And that wasn't you. And it was, at the time, I think you were very skeptical. How big could India get?
It won't take on America. They never will. Definitely not in my working life, but certainly not even in yours. I mean that respectfully.
I think mine's going to be the same as yours, David.
Well, I won't know because I won't be around. But I wish you luck. No, it'll be big in the terms of the business of where it's come from. I think that's a better way of describing it. I forget how many airplanes there are in North America. I was probably told in my briefing sheet, but I've forgotten. It's a lot. And, China with 150, 200 is small. But there's a business, there's a strong business. We're here to do that business, whether it's India or China, Australia. And I think it's a valuable market because it tends to be the larger airplanes. There's obviously a lot more smaller aircraft in North America. Distances, somewhat, a farmer owns a King Air or a small Citation. He doesn't need a Global Express. And so I think the dominant share is the larger aircraft in Asia, and that's going to remain the same. So the value to us as a company in dollar terms is disproportionately higher than the average transaction in North America.
How much do you think a country's success as a business aviation market is because of hard infrastructure? Airports and FBOs and things like air traffic control, where China has limited, restricted air traffic control, and how much of it is because of the soft infrastructure, the fact that the guy down the road flies regularly, that you have an air cadets, you've got I'm just thinking, if you look at the countries like America, Australia, Canada, Brazil, these have got it's sort of, aviation is very embedded in them as a country, isn't it? It's not just. I know they've got the airfields like and the UK, I guess, would be there. But do you know what I mean? Like the fact that you wanted to start flying when you were at school.
Yes, and I've often wondered how I could try and put some of the energy that I had when I was sort of 17, 18, 19 in this business to the kids here. because I used to go down to the local airport, in my case, Biggin Hill, and sit and watch aeroplanes. Well, you can't do that in parts of this part of the world because you're probably seen as a security risk if you did that. And there aren't flying schools, there aren't little airports you can go and fly from, which I think is a shame. And I know the airlines that have training programs have trouble getting kids to be interested in the business. And it's an understanding of what it's all about. And I'm sad for our business. Very large percentage of the labor force is expatriate up in the flight deck for sure, and that's slowly changing. But the glamour is seen as going off and flying for SQ or Cathay or Emirates, whoever it might be, not sitting in a aeroplane in a small runway in the middle of Australia. And that glamour isn't Australia. Maybe no, but Australia's a bad one because you have got that energy that you have in Europe, but somewhere in Indonesia or somewhere in the Philippines, the perception is very different. Whereas in Hong Kong, people say to you, "What do you do?" And I say, "I sell aircraft." They sort of look at me as if I'm an oddity because it's just, if you said I was a lawyer or an accountant, they got it, they understand it. If you say to them, "I sell airplanes," they sort of, there's a blank expression there. It isn't, unfortunately, there isn't the level of passion on the street here that I would like to see, and I would love to know how to change that.
How hard did you find it when you went from selling at an OEM to Jetcraft?
Well, as an OEM, your airplane starts from zero in the sense that it's zero time. You know the condition of it, you know the configuration, all that stuff. With the pre-owned market, each end of the equation can be completely different. Once it's gone off into service for a few years, the engineers, condition of the aircraft, the maintenance of the airplane, to your point, the storage of the airplane. No two airplanes are the same the minute they fly out the door. And that's what is interesting. I've followed some airplanes and I've seen them come in and out a couple of times. I've dealt with a single airframe more than once sometimes. And you see the life that airplane's been through and who's looked after it. Sometimes I can say this, I know exactly where that came from. In some cases, I sold them when they were new out of Bombardier. But the very interesting part of the Jetcraft side of selling airplanes is that no two deals are the same. They're always different. With Bombardier, I'm not saying it's cookie cutter because I'm being demeaning, but you started off from a known baseline. But with this business, you don't know where the baseline is going to be. Could be anywhere. That's an interesting part.
10 years ago, there used to be, I remember someone saying to me, you get new aircraft buyers and you've got pre-owned buyers. And, some people like buying new cars. Some people like getting the deal on a pre-owned. Do you agree with that now?
It's still an element. I think some people are less scared or less intimidated by a pre-owned product. I don't mean it from the dollars. I mean there's some value. The manufacturers sometimes make it easier because you've got long lead times on some of these aircraft. I am working on a project this time where they're talking about the second quarter 28. Well, I can't wait. I don't mean me, my customer can't wait till 28. So the pre-owned product starts to gain its own momentum sometimes by virtue of the OEM status. But that's also a good indicator because if they've got long lead times, that's a fairly healthy backlog, which means there's a healthy demand. And that's more business coming down the road for us. So I see that while it's a short-term, frustration. Someone says, "Oh, can't get an airplane in 28. I've got to buy secondhand." I don't see that as now being a negative reflection. I see it as a positive overall assessment of our business.
So in your 30 years at Bombardier, or in your time,
33 years, 33 years, 11 months. Get it right.
it wasn't all business jets. In your business jet time, you had highs and lows. If I had joined if someone's joined an OEM selling aircraft in the last 5 years, they've had a very different market. Yeah, they're having to deal with backlogs. You had to sell whitetails.
Yes.
The pressure is completely different.
Yeah, I remember Brian Moss. This is going back into the 90s, when those days he worked for Bombardier or Canadair. And I was over in Montreal for whatever reason, I can't remember. But I distinctly remember being called into his office, and sitting outside the window were several whitetails, green aeroplanes, whatever you want to call them, probably 8 or 9. He said to me, "David, that's payroll. Which one are you going to sell?" When you're focused like that, you realize the significance of getting that deal. You go away and you really got to make this work. So you've got to put some thought into this. And if you take that approach all the time to every deal, you've got a better chance. If you just think, "Oh, I'm so good, my product's so good, it can sell itself," and there are some OEMs with salespeople who think that. No product can sell itself. You've got to get it out there. Sometimes it's easier to walk in the door with this in your briefcase than other things, but you've still got to get the message across. It comes back to that one piece of paper.
And when you sold a whitetail, did you get a massive pat on the back, or were you just told to go out and sell one of the other ones?
Yes, when's the next one going? No, it was tough. I mean, you didn't have it so much in Europe or the States, but there was SARS in Hong Kong or Asia, which was sort of equivalent to COVID. And that was in sort of 2002, 3, somewhere around there. That was horrible. And then you got the financial crisis in 2007, 8, wasn't it? Something like that.
Yeah.
That was horrible. It was tough to go to the office. There was plenty to do, but there wasn't much to do that sounded very good. And then when I very first year selling business aircraft was in 97, which happened to be the year of the handover of Hong Kong. The day after the handover of Hong Kong, unrelated to Hong Kong, was the Asian financial crisis, when the baht collapsed, and with that went the ringgit and everything else. And there was no China at that point, or of any significance. And all the aircraft that we had sold, all the globals I had sold into various countries, were all up for sale. The principals couldn't get the foreign exchange at that point. And at that point, the American market was gangbusters. So I was just hoovering them up out of Asia to sell them back to the States. It rather decimated the market that I slowly built up out here. And when I sort of look back at it, it was a sort of good and bad. It was good for the company, but it was bad for the region. But that's what, coming back to the economy, we are a business that's very much a barometer and a guide as to where business sentiment is, whether it's in the boardroom or it's the currency or whether it's the share price.
And when you have something like the Asian crisis or the SARS, and your colleagues in Europe or Latin America or North America are just, aircraft are flying out the door, did you ever think, I chose the wrong market here?
Never. And it goes back to my days at Britten Norman. There were 5 of us taken on at the same time, and we were all called into an office, meeting room, whatever, to divide the world. And the easy market, in my mind, was America. That's where the market was. There was, I forget what the percentage were, but a very large percentage of the airplanes were. And then the next one was Europe. Then someone sort of was offered Asia. And to that point, I didn't know anything about Asia, so I didn't say. But then was Africa. And I said, yes, please, I want Africa. I'd only ever been to Rhodesia at that point, which wasn't Africa. It doesn't exist as a country in that sense today, but it was a very different political environment there at that point. But to me, no one expected me to do anything or achieve very much. Oh, yes, you'll be okay. You go and have fun down in Africa. And I thought that was the challenge. So no, absolutely not. And it was why I came over here, because I'd rather sort of played my time, I think, in Africa. Africa, I mean, will always be a soft spot in my heart. I'm going to get a bit emotional here. Africa has got me going in this business, and I owe a lot to Africa. And I love the place, but it had played its course, and sadly, most things you read and see and hear about in Africa are generally negative. There's not a lot of positivity coming up. I might be wrong on all of that, but it's the general perception. And I just that in the early 90s, in mid 90s, Asia sounded like it was going to offer a lot. And so I made that move and never regretted it. And I think, it'll never be the biggest market, but it's that challenge going right back to when I said I'll have Africa. It's that challenge. I don't need to be in North America. It's relatively easy. Someone walks in and says, I want to buy a Citation this, or I want to buy a Challenger that. They know what they want.
What advice would you give to someone who wanted to work in business aviation?
Don't be afraid to learn the business. I don't think people pick up magazines. I'm not going to try and be an advertorial for CJI here, Alistair, but people forget to go and read Aviation Week or Flight International or find out about what's going on. They see it as a database on a laptop. They don't read and inwardly digest the human side and some of the things that go, what's behind this airplane? What's the history to it? I think you gain a lot from knowing what it is you're actually trying to sell, rather than just it flies this far. A lot of people, I don't think, even know what the airplanes do. And sometimes I've said to somebody, although my job isn't to make them decide to buy one type over another, by the way, I don't think it'll do this, or have you had a look at this because, or what if, I like that expression, what if you look at it differently rather than ram it down someone's throat. So I think if people could show more interest in a business, that comes through when you're sitting in front of somebody trying to sell it. If you know the background, the history, and some of the problems sometimes that the product has had, it'll help. So I feel people need to read, learn, and inwardly digest.
And what advice would you give to someone buying a business jet for the first time?
You need to get proper advice. Not everything is price. Don't drive everything just from price, because like anything else, you get what you pay for in a lot of cases. Understanding what you want to do, where you want to go. I don't very often get involved in selling a particular product. I get involved in responding to requirements. Generally speaking, someone says, I want this, I want that. I don't, unlike my days at Bombardier when I'd be competing against Dassault or against Gulfstream, you were making spurious comments about the other team going forward and trying to sort of present your. Although I try, and still to this day, try and avoid furiously making spurious comments about the other airplane, because it'll bite you for sure. I think get it down to that one piece of paper, the key points of what they want, and that's the message. So I find myself trying to get people to understand what they're looking at, if it's a first-time buyer, to understand what it can and can't do. Try and find out a bit more about their business, do a bit of reading up on them, find out where they go, where they get, if you can, maybe where they got a home or homes sometimes. Do they have a yacht? Where do they keep it? That gives you a bit of a mosaic around which to build a case to better understand who you're selling to.
And when are you going to retire?
Yeah. How often do I get that these days? The answer is, as long as I'm mentally capable and physically able, I hope that day doesn't literally have a specific end. There is going to be a point where I'm going to say I'm going to hang up my spurs or my wings, or whatever you want to put it. I still get challenged, as I said, 20 minutes, 30 minutes ago. I still get challenged every day. And as long as that continues, if this becomes tedious, or boring, or just a job, then probably that's the day. But it hasn't happened in 50-something years, so why should it happen in the next few? There might be some other people around the traps who would like me to disappear or whatever, but they'll just have to wait. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm not going to announce it. It'll happen one day. I'm not going to give people the benefit of a countdown.
David, on that note, thank you so much. David Dixon, Chairman, Jetcraft Asia. Thank you.
You've changed my title since the beginning to the end. Thank you.
Anyway,
thank you. Alistair, thank you, and I look forward to seeing you in Singapore.
I was going to do I meant to give you a plug for your sparkling wine.